All right, so today we're going to start by talking about verbs. So first of all, what is a verb? A verb is usually thought of as an action word. So some typical verbs you might know are jump, swim, run. But you also want to watch out for verbs like is and are. These are versions of to be, which might not sound like an action, but existing is being. And we need to make sure that we're always keeping an eye out for all different types of verbs. The first thing we're going to do when we deal with a verb question is look for agreement. This means that your subject and your verb need to agree in number. So when we have a singular subject, we're going to have a verb that actually counterintuitively has an S on the end. One example would be the dog eats meat. So we have our singular subject, the dog, and we have an S on the end of our verb, eats. Now, if we were dealing with a plural subject, we would say the dogs, and our verb is not going to have an S on the end. The dogs eat meat, no S. Then we also need to look out for situations where we have two verbs together. There are smaller verbs called auxiliary or helping verbs, which are sometimes paired with a longer verb that has maybe an ing ending or an ed ending. We have some examples here, like the dog is barking. Now, in this case, we haven't changed the word barking, but we need to make sure that our is, that little auxiliary verb or the helping verb, actually matches with our singular subject. So one dog is barking. Now, if we had a plural subject, we would say the dogs are barking. Again, note that we haven't changed barking, we've just changed the verb in front, are. This also applies when we're talking about the past tense, or if we're talking about longer perfect tense verbs. So the dog has barked or the dogs have barked. In both of those cases, has and have, we still need to make sure we're agreeing with our singular or our plural subject, dog or dogs. Part of the reason that we want to deal with this is so that we can always make sure we know what's happening in our sentence. If we can find our subject and our verb, we have what's called a core sentence. All right, so let's look at a couple of examples of core sentences. So again, we're trying to find our subject and our verb. So the first example, the dog in the yard is barking, we still need to look for subject and verb agreement. So we have our singular subject, the dog, and we have our singular verb, is. In our next example, we have the dog that I got from the pound last week is barking. Even though there's more stuff in between our subject and verb, we still are making sure that we have a singular subject, the dog, and a singular verb, is, barking. And in our last example, no matter what they put in between the subject and verb, we still need to make sure we have a singular subject and a singular verb. Even if your sentence is, the dog, which I got from my ex-girlfriend, Jessica, in a pathetic attempt to win her affection back after she dumped me, right in front of everyone in the hallway outside math class a little over 3 months ago, is barking. We still say is barking because our subject is still the dog, singular. Now what we're going to talk about is all of that stuff in the middle. We discussed the core sentence, our subject and verb, and everything that came in between in each of the previous examples is what we call an interrupting clause. That is additional information in the sentence that may be important later on, but right now we're focusing on just the subject and verb to make sure they agree. In this example, it's actually pretty easy to see where our main subject and our main verb are, because we conveniently have commas that block off everything else in the sentence. So the queen, who has absolute power over her subjects, as well as all the dukes and other aristocrats, are rich. But once we pull out the core sentence, the queen and the verb are rich, we can see that our singular subject, the queen, should not be matched up with a plural verb, are. This allows us to really focus in on our subject and verb agreement. So what we can actually do is actually cross out all of the stuff in the middle. Just go ahead and strike through that middle information so that you're left with your core information, your subject and your verb. We can also see that this sometimes happens with different types of punctuation. Our previous example had 2 commas, but dashes can be used in a similar way. So the sequel's budget estimated to be over $100 million, is more than double that of the original movie. Once again, we have punctuation that helps pinpoint our core sentence. Those two dashes bracket off information that's additional, and we can find our subject and verb around it. The sequel's budget is more than double that of the original movie. In this case, again, we have a budget, which is a singular subject, and we need to make sure that our verb is agrees with our singular subject. Now, sometimes it's not going to be quite as easy to find our interrupting clauses. Occasionally, we will have that nice punctuation, like commas or like dashes, but sometimes we won't have any punctuation at all, and we still need to find our core sentence. So in this example, the dog that I got from the pound last week is barking. We want to try to find our subject and the main verb or action that that subject is doing. In this case, the dog is going to be our subject, as we've seen from many previous examples, and our verb will still be is, barking. That I got from the pound last week is an interrupting clause that gives us additional information but does not contain the subject or the verb. You may see some other nouns or some other different types of words in that interrupting clause, but if it's not the main subject that is doing an action, we want to strike it through and get rid of it. A special type of interrupting clause that we need to deal with is prepositional phrases. These are phrases that are made up of small relationship words like of, in, for, from, about, with, or on, and they demonstrate a relationship between two words. Now this is typically two nouns, but as we'll see, it can also be a relationship between a verb and a subject. So what we want to do is begin by looking for our prepositions. Once we can identify our prepositions, then we can work on eliminating the entire phrase. In this example here, the word in is a preposition. So when we say the dog in the yard, we're using in to demonstrate a relationship between the dog and the yard. We know where the dog is located. The yard is going to be our object. Every prepositional phrase is made up of a preposition and an object, and what we need to do is identify both the preposition and the object and remove it so that we can focus on the other nouns in the sentence, typically our subject, and find the verb that that subject matches with. So in this example, the phrase in the yard is our prepositional phrase, and it describes our subject. Now, if we have a longer sentence, we can still always try to find our preposition and get rid of it in order to narrow the sentence down to our core of our subject and our verb. So the dogs in the yard are barking. We have the dogs in the yard. We've seen that in is a preposition, so we want to cross out in and the object that comes after it, the yard, so that we're left with the dogs are barking. This allows us to look at our subject and verb agreement, and we can see that our plural subject, the dogs, is paired with our plural verb are. This also applies for our other examples here. Our preposition in the next sentence would be with, and the object of that preposition is 3 children. So the man with 3 children is married. We're trying to focus on the man as our subject and is as our verb. So in our next example, we have all flights to Denver have been delayed. What is our preposition? Our preposition in this case is to, and the object of that preposition is Denver. So what we want to do is eliminate our prepositional phrase and get rid of to Denver so that we're left with all flights, a plural subject, and our verb have been delayed. The last example, we have the movie about vampires is scary. So what's our preposition? About. This one is a little bit longer, so remember that some prepositions might be slightly longer, but they all demonstrate relationships. So in this case, we get rid of about and our object, vampires. So we're left with our singular subject, the movie, and our singular verb, is. So next, what we need to do is apply this in a longer sentence. We're not always going to have a nice short sentence with small prepositional phrases. This example is quite long, as you can see, and we want to start by doing what we did on the other examples, looking for our prepositions and getting rid of the preposition and their object. We want to look for our verb, We have improved later on in the sentence. That is our action that's happening in this sentence. And what we want to do is get rid of all of those prepositions that we see. We have of, several groups. So of is eliminated and its object, several groups. We then have of townhouses. We're going to eliminate that too, get rid of it. So we cross out of townhouses. And across the street, another preposition. We want to get rid of that as well. So strike out across the street. And we're getting towards the end of our sentence, but we're not quite done yet. We have from the complex, another preposition, cross it out. One more, of office buildings. We also want to cross that out as well. So what we're left with is our core sentence. We have our subject, the construction, and we have our verb, have improved. But what type of subject are we dealing with? Singular or plural? Well, the construction is one thing. So it's going to be a singular subject. And what about our verb? Is have improved something we can use with a singular subject? Nope, it's not. So we're actually going to have to change it. In this case, we would prefer to say the construction has improved the neighborhood. Now, what we're going to move on to next are scenarios where you have more than one subject or more than one verb. In some cases, you will have two subjects that are doing the same action. So the bulldog and the beagle is barking. Now, when you have more than one subject, even if they're listed separately, if they're doing the same action, that verb has to match with both of your subjects. So if we have two subjects, it becomes a plural subject. In this case, we could not say the bulldog and the beagle is barking. Instead, we would have to say the bulldog and the beagle are barking. We consider them one plural subject. Now, this also happens where we have a singular subject, but multiple verbs. In this case, we need to make sure that the verb still agrees with the subject, but we have one singular subject, the dog, and then we have two separate verbs. We have eats meat and loves bones. Both of those actions have to agree in number with our singular subject. So we would say the dog eats meat. Make sure you put the S on there because remember, our singular subject needs an S on the end of the verb. And we do the same thing with loves bones. Still has an S on the end there as well. And in this way, we're able to deal with multiple subjects and multiple verbs.